Republicans and Democrats sparred again in the second public impeachment hearing. A U.S. ambassador ousted by President Trump told an impeachment hearing that she felt intimidated by the president. The 33-year-old diplomatic veteran, Marie Yovanovitch, spoke in personal terms about how she was subjected to a painful smear campaign before being abruptly pulled from Kiev. Let's listen in and let's hear the highlights of this impeachment hearing.
Closed deposition, I expressed grave concerns about the degradation of the Foreign Service over the past few years and the failure of State Department leadership to push back as foreign and corrupt interests apparently hijacked our Ukraine policy. I remain disappointed that the department's leadership and others have declined to acknowledge that the attacks against me and others are dangerously wrong.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, as we sit here testifying, the President is attacking you on Twitter, and I'd like to give you a chance to respond. I'll read part of one of his tweets. Everywhere Marie Yovanovitch went turned bad. But would you like to respond to the President's attack that everywhere you went turned bad?
Well, I don't think I have such powers, not in Mogadishu, Somalia, and not in other places. I actually think that where I've served over the years, I and others have demonstrably made things better, for the U.S. as well as for the countries that I've served in.
And now the President in real time is attacking you. What effect do you think that has on other witnesses' willingness to come forward and expose wrongdoing?
Well, it's very intimidating.
Shifting gears to corruption in Ukraine, in your powerful deposition, you described, quote, "We have long understood that strong anti-corruption efforts must form an essential part of our policy in Ukraine, and now there is a window of opportunity to do that. And so why is this important, and why is this important to us? Put simply, anti-corruption efforts serve Ukraine's interests, but they also serve ours as well." Is that still your testimony?
Yes.
But let's take a step back. The first time you personally became aware of Burisma was actually when you were being prepared by the Obama State Department for your Senate confirmation hearings. And this was in the form of practice questions and answers. This was your deposition. And you testified that in this particular practice Q&A with the Obama State Department, it wasn't just generally about Burisma and corruption, it was specifically about Hunter Biden and Burisma. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And the exact quote from your testimony, Ambassador, is, quote, "The way the question was phrased in this model Q&A was, what can you tell us about Hunter Biden's, being named to the board of Burisma?" So for the millions of Americans watching, President Obama's own State Department was so concerned about potential conflicts of interest from Hunter Biden's role at Burisma that they raised it themselves while prepping this wonderful ambassador nominee before her confirmation. And yet our Democratic colleagues and the chairman of this committee cry foul when we dare ask that same question that the Obama State Department was so concerned about. But we will continue asking it. And lastly, in my 20 seconds left, I just want to get it on record. In terms of defensive lethal aid, which you were an advocate for, that was not provided by President Obama. It was provided by President Trump.
That's correct.
I yield back 5 seconds.
You understood from Deputy Assistant Secretary George Kent's testimony, as it's been related to you, that he testified a few days ago. Do you understand that that arrangement, Hunter Biden's role on the Burisma board, caused him enough concern that, as he testified in his statement, that in February of 2015, I raised my concern that Hunter Biden's status as a board member could create the perception of a conflict of interest. And he went on to talk about the Vice President's responsibilities over the Ukrainian policy as one of those factors. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
That it was a legitimate concern to raise?
I think that it could raise the appearance of a conflict of interest.
but the legitimate concern about Hunter Biden's role was legitimate, correct?
I think it creates a concern that there could be an appearance of
Well, based on your
conflict of interest.
testimony, Ambassador, I'd like to renew my request, Mr. Chairman, that Hunter Biden's testimony that has been
Time of the
requested,
gentleman has expired.
requested by the Republicans be considered
The gentleman has expired.
as
Mr.
legitimate
Heck,
rather than as a sham, as the
Gentleman will
has been
suspend.
referred to
Gentleman will
by the
suspend.
chairman.
Your time has
I
expired.
have a unanimous.
Mr. Heck,
I have a
you are
unanimous
recognized.
consent request.
You're not recognized. Mr. Heck, you are.
Ambassador, I don't really have very many questions.
Meanwhile, Republicans zeroed in on whether Ambassador Yovanovitch had first-hand knowledge of key events. Let's listen in again.
Into. Ambassador, I don't really have very many questions for you. You admitted in your opening statement that you don't have any first-hand knowledge of the issues that we're looking into. Do you believe that Senator Grassley is a serious and credible elected official?
I have no reason to think otherwise.
Were you involved in the July 25th Trump-Zelensky phone call or preparations for the call?
No, I was not.
Were you involved in the deliberations about the pause in military sales to Ukraine as the Trump administration reviewed newly elected President Zelensky's commitment to corruption reforms?
For the delay in
For the pause.
the pause? No, I was not.
Were you involved in the proposed Trump-Zelensky, later Pence-Zelensky meetings in Warsaw, Poland on September 1st?
No, I was not.
Did you ever talk to President Trump in 2019?
No, I have not.
Mick Mulvaney?
No, I have not.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm not exactly sure what the ambassador is doing here today. This is the House Intelligence Committee that's now turned into the House Impeachment Committee. This seems more appropriate for the Subcommittee on Human Resources at the Foreign Affairs Committee. If there's issues with employment, disagreements with the administration, it would seem like this would be a more appropriate setting instead of an impeachment hearing where the ambassador is not a material fact witness to any of the accusations that are being hurled at the president for this impeachment inquiry. I have several questions I think Mr. Castor wants to get to. I know, Ms. Stefanik, you had a few quick questions for the ambassador. I'll yield to you, Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Nunez. Ambassador Yovanovitch, thank you for being here today.
The gentlewoman will suspend.
What is the interruption for this time? It is our time.
The gentlewoman will suspend. You're not recognized. Mr. Nunez, you are minority counsel.
I just recognized.
Under the House Resolution 660, you're not allowed to yield time except to minority counsel.
The ranking member yielded time to another member of Congress.
No, that is not accurate.
You're gagging the young
That is
lady from
accurate.
New York.
Ambassador Yovanovitch, I want to thank you for being
Gentlewoman
here
will
today.
suspend. You're not recognized.
Tell you about what tampering is. Tampering
Now, the Democrats are accusing the president earlier of tweet intimidation. Here's the president's response.
about what tampering is. Tampering is when a guy like Shifty Schiff doesn't let us have lawyers. Tampering is when Schiff doesn't let us have witnesses, doesn't let us speak. I've been watching today. For the first time, I started watching, and it's really sad when you see people not allowed to ask questions. It's totally, nobody's ever had such horrible due process. There was no due process. And I think it's considered a joke all over Washington and all over the world. The Republicans are given no due process whatsoever. We're not allowed to do anything. It's a disgrace what's happening. But you know what? The American public understands it, and that's why the poll numbers are so good. And like it. In the history of our country, there has never been a disgrace like what's going on right now. So you know what? I have the right to speak. I have freedom of speech, just as other people do. But they've taken away the Republicans' rights. And I watched today as certain very talented people wanted to ask questions, and they weren't even allowed to ask questions. Republicans, they weren't allowed to ask questions. It's a very sad